Okay. Good morning, Marie.
Yes, I'm very well, thank you.
I just wanted to start by saying thank you for taking the time out to take part in this podcast. You, like everyone that takes time to do these podcasts, your busy schedules and stuff like that. But I know you're really passionate about sharing your story and also, I guess, working within education. But if you could, just give kind of like a short synopsis, maybe for some of the some of the people that may not know yourself just yet, and what kind of things I guess we'll be talking about.
Yes, of course. So I'm Marie Gentles, and I initially qualified as a primary school classroom teacher many moons ago. And it was in the mainstream sector. I worked within the mainstream sector for just under 10 years. And then I transferred to the specialist sector, where I went to work in a primary, initially, pupil referral unit and absolutely loved it. I became the deputy head there. Then my work kind of spread out to, even though I worked within the pupil referral unit, it spread out to supporting mainstream schools as well in regards to their pupils and their behaviour. Then our pupil referral unit also expanded to become a social, emotional, and mental health provision as well. So it was a PRU and an SEMH provision because there was such a huge need in the borough. I then became head teacher there, brought that provision up to outstanding, worked there for around 10 years again. And then at the end of 2019, I left. We got the Peru in a fantastic place. And then I left and opened up my own business, Gentles Guidance Limited. And now I work independently as a behaviour advisor and consultant, and I deliver training right across the country, but not just to schools and provisions, to parents, carers, social workers, police, just anyone who supports children and young people in any capacity.
Okay, fantastic. You missed out the bit where you got an OBE. I think very humble person we're talking to now.
Okay. Well, yes, that is true. So when I was a deputy head teacher, I was tasked with the role of creating a nurture group provision. And at the time, I didn't realize it was the first of its kind nationally. So this provision, the reason why it was the first of its kind nationally is because many people are aware of nurture groups. Usually it's based in one particular school and hosts the young people within that school. But the nurture group that I set up, unbeknown to me, was the first of its kind nationally because it catered to an entire London borough. So children and young people from any of the schools within the borough were able to be referred to the nurture group. And then we supported those young people for an intervention of about 15 to 20 weeks, and then we integrated them back into the mainstream, into their mainstream schools. And we had a 95 to 100% success rate year after year after year, which got noticed and picked up quite quickly nationally. People say, "Well, what did you do?" I was thinking, I just did my job, and and it was off the back of that that I was then awarded an OBE, and I got that in 2020. In 2020.
Okay, wow. Um, so much to unpick. If we're okay to reel it back, if that's okay, and we'll catch up with ourselves if that's all right. Um, so in the world, there's millions of jobs you could have picked. What made you pick to become a teacher? And what was your route to become a teacher? Did you have any outside influences that helped you become a teacher?
Well, I'll answer the question backwards. So I didn't really have any outside influences to help me become a teacher, if I'm honest. I'm the first teacher in my family on both my mum and dad's side. Um, but the reason why I wanted to become a teacher is because from a very, very, very young age, I was, for some reason, acutely aware of emotions and behavior. I honestly don't know why. I just was, and I was a very sensitive child, so I could really easily pick up on someone else's emotions or their feelings, and I was just I was very quiet, but I was very curious as to why certain people behaved as they did. So whether that be really, really quiet or maybe they were really outspoken, whether their behaviour was deemed, in inverted commas, as good or not so good. I was just really intrigued by it all. And then as I grew up, within my family on my mum's side, a number of my aunties, 3 of them, they became foster carers, and 2 of my aunties also adopted, and my mum later on also became a foster carer. So I just had this massive interest and drive to kind of really think about young people and future generations and what that looks like, and the fact that, I know it sounds a really obvious statement, but children and young people literally shape the world for the future. And I just wanted to be part of that. I know it's quite a big answer, but it's the truth. I just wanted to be part of supporting children and young people to be the best that they could possibly be.
Sorry, there's a little bit of lag. And I would probably say, in my reflection on what you've just said, would you say then seeing children given, the only best way to describe it when they've been fostered and stuff, a second chance or a loving home, is people, adults, caring for these children, trying to give them the best from where they started? So it's, I know it's not teaching children within education, but education is, it's a duality, isn't it? It's from home and from school. It's almost a relationship between both sides. And I guess listening to yourself, you would have seen the nurture side from a home perspective, and how these children, I guess, improved over time through, living in a loving home. And I guess, I don't know, would you say that influenced you as well? It would influence me. Do you know what I mean? Seeing that love and how it affected these children from where they started, no doubt.
Yes, definitely. I think what I started to recognise was that for children and young people to learn, so we have this education system, and there's pros and cons of everything. So you have this education system, but in order for every young person to have equal opportunities and be able to learn, they have to feel emotionally safe and secure. And again, I didn't know all the details about it when I was first deciding to go into teaching, but I was still quite acutely aware of this kind of divide. There was this one side where we need to support young people with their behaviour, and then there was this other side that seemed quite separate, which was about academics and achievement and grades. And I kept thinking to myself, but they're one of the same thing. That they're the same thing. We shouldn't separate it. And I've had many professionals over the years say things to me, especially colleagues within specialist settings, ask me questions and say, how do we get our provision to the standard that we want it to be? We can't really focus on the academic side right now because we have to focus on the behaviour. And I've always replied and said, no, you do both at the same time. There's a way to do both in the best interest of the children and young people. So for me, it was never separate. To me, it was always about achievement, was about really ensuring that young people could grow with this sense of self-worth, and this sense of capability. And if you have that as your base, then as you grow, you are then more open and able to achieve academically as well as in other areas. And I think that's what I found really intriguing, because it felt like a massive divide for these young people who maybe had slightly, a very different start in life, or their behaviour seemed to just overtake everything. So that's I've always found that really, really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I did notice, I noticed a million things, but your deputy head teacher in the first series of your documentary, just one of the key children, a young blonde child, wanted to be a policeman, and they were doing an activity, because he mentioned it before in the episode, but he was doing something and he started to be a little bit aggressive towards another child. And then the teacher said, I forgot, let's call him Henry. Is it Henry? I forgot Henry in my head. I don't think it's Henry, but she just said, Oscar, is that what a good policeman would do? A good policeman would use nice hands, wouldn't he? And he just moved his hands. And it's like you said, you've given them purpose in what they're doing, which changes their actions, and obviously bringing it into the activity that they're doing. And I thought, that's really interesting. She didn't just say, no, stop, or stop being naughty, or that's bad, or whatever else. She described what a good policeman would do, because he wants to be a policeman. There's a motivation behind what he's going to do. And sorry, I've just thought, this is exactly what you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? You're not just doing, oh, okay, actually look over here, it's a pretty thing, come and do this, come away from this activity, actually carry on learning, but I'm going to give you a purpose. So yeah, is that kind of what you're describing in a way? I know there's many ways of doing it. I'm not a professional, but that's what I took from what you're saying to what I watched, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. I think for teachers and school staff, I think there's such huge pressure, because I think that there's this idea or the feeling that you have to wear so many hats. It's not, you don't just go in and right, this is my classroom and I need to get these young people to achieve these grades. It's more than that. You're trying to develop and support the whole child, and it can feel very overwhelming. However, what I always say is that if we go into the profession and within the school system as a whole, thinking about the whole child, actually that feeling of stress can actually come down a bit. We don't need to know everything. We don't need to be a social worker, and a this and a that, and a psychologist and all the rest of it. But we do need to know how to motivate children and young people to achieve. So, and through things like real life experiences, we know there's lots of research about things through play, and connecting it to something that means something in real life for children and young people, right through to end of secondary school, actually, that supports them to learn and to achieve. So it's also just about understanding the different vehicles to get the outcomes that we desire in the best interest for the children and young people.
Yeah, keep them stimulated, keep them interested in what they're doing. And okay, how did you make the decision to take the path that you did? So let's say you could have easily become an EYFS specialist and just done early years, just stayed in primary or secondary. So how was that initial first step when you're an ECT back then, to decide the route? Did someone help you decide, or was it a natural progression? Or
So when I first went into teaching, when I got my first teaching job, I didn't have any thought. In fact, I'm going to have a confession here. I didn't even know what a pupil referral unit was. I had no idea, I'm going to be honest. So when I first went into teaching within the mainstream sector, I just kind of assumed in my head, this is my profession. It's kind of solid. I'm data happy, and I'm going to help young people and just do the best that I can do as a teacher, kind of for the rest of my life. And there's also nothing wrong with that, if that was my trajectory. But I'm just being honest, that's what I thought at the time. But then after the first thing that really started to influence the direction I wanted to go in was when, I think it was in my third year of teaching, and I had a year 2 class in this lovely, small Catholic school. And I was very excited. I love the school, love the staff, the children, the families. And I remember very clearly it was time for SATs. So we did all the SATs assessments. And unbeknown to me at the time, because I didn't have all the knowledge and expertise that I have now, I had been teaching my class, as teachers do, in, teaching them the curriculum, but I had also been nurturing them in so many other ways, to the point that, other children from other classes in all different year groups would get sent to my classroom, but they would still learn in my classroom. So I was obviously doing something with them that was having positive outcomes, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Anyway, so SATs came around, we did the SATs assessment, and I remember really clearly, once that was all completed, I was pulled into senior leader's office. I was quite nervous because, I was thinking, I have done a good job, haven't I? And they had said to me, Marie, we're going to redo the SATs assessments. And I said, oh, but why? I was very much like following things by the book back then. I wanted to just, be the best I could be. And I was so confused. I thought I did something wrong. And they said, the SATs results have come out really high. And I said, well, that's great, isn't it? But they said, it is. But the problem is, because you've done so well with this class and their SATs results are really high, it puts a lot of pressure on the teachers for the rest of their primary school years to maintain that. So we're going to redo the assessment for you. So this was in my I think it was my fourth year of teaching, apologies. And I was so taken aback and so confused, because I thought to myself, but isn't this what teaching is about? Getting positive outcomes for the children and young people. And that was the first time when I really thought to myself, there's we're in a system and there's pressure, which I've always understood, but that shouldn't impact on how we do things in school. Like, we shouldn't just fall into those things just to make sure we're in line. And so it was after that I actually left the school, and I said to myself, if I'm such a good teacher, because I would get very good, if I was an observation, good feedback and all the rest, I thought, if I'm such a good teacher, let me go into another area, which is quite different from the school and the area I was in, and let me kind of test myself. So that's how I kind of began to expand. So I went into what we label as more deprived areas. Some label them as rougher areas, not my language, but this is the kind of language that was used. And so I went to teach in lots of different areas around London. And I thought, I love this. I love working with children and young people who have maybe come from different backgrounds or have had a different start in life. I love the children. I love the character of the young people who express themselves through their behaviour. And I also love that they can also achieve, and it shouldn't be separate, and we shouldn't be holding them back. We should go as far as they can go. So after doing that for a few years, that's when I ended up moving into the specialist sector. And I thought to myself, I want to specialise in this area with children and young people, specifically with behavioural needs. And that's how I got into the pupil referral unit. There just happened actually to be a post going not too far from where I lived at the time. And I thought, let me go in and give this a go. It was quite shocking when I first went in, I'm not going to lie. I did question myself, can I do this? I did. I really did, quite a few times over. But inside me, in my gut, I knew this is where I was supposed to be. So that's kind of how I journeyed into that area. Never look back. Never look back.
What, you were chasing the challenge, basically? That is.
Yes.
But not just chasing a challenge. You knew to learn more, you had to try different environments in order to grow as a person, as a practitioner. You were looking to better yourself as well. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just like, oh, let me find the toughest school. I guess listening to yourself, like, I need new experience in order to grow. And I've got all these experiences. Where can I best utilize them? Oh, there's a Prue down the road. Great. And you were like, ah. I can just see the first day, all the dreams and hopes. You walk through the door, you're like, oh my God. But I guess it takes time to acclimatise to any new school, and working in a Prue is no different. It's just different from what you were used to. Exactly. So for those that don't know, for that teacher that is green maybe out there, that may more likely should have heard of a Prue, but can you describe what a Prue is and what it does? Because I used to get confused with, a child struggles emotionally, SEMH, then I know now it's not, but they might go to a Prue. Do you know what I mean? But now you have dedicated SEMH school and ASD schools. A Prue is something different, and they're not. I used to think this there all year. You get expelled, you go to a Prue, and that's you. You're not at school anymore. But actually it's intervention. So yeah, I'll let you better describe it, because more eloquently than I ever would do, just for people out there, and also people that aren't in education that might be interested in what a Prue is.
Yeah, of course. So a pupil referral unit is a provision for children and young people who, it actually is a provision for children and young people who are at risk of exclusion. But what often happens, and the way Prues are often used, is once a young person has been excluded, then they attend the Prue. So it's a bit of both. So you have young people who have been permanently excluded from their school, and they may be looking for a new school or a new provision, depending on need, and then they attend a pupil referral unit. Or, and preferably, it's for children and young people who are at risk of exclusion from their mainstream setting, and they attend the pupil referral unit as an intervention, and then they should then reintegrate back into their mainstream school. So that is the kind of proper structure, if you like, of a pupil referral unit. And the reason why we also opened a SEMH provision, social, emotional and mental health provision, is because what was happening was we would have children and young people referred to the pupil referral unit, but then they didn't have a pathway. So there were some young people with SEMH needs who came to the pupil referral unit, and actually they needed a longer intervention, or they needed an alternative provision to mainstream. And that's why we opened the SEMH provision, because with a young person who attends a PRU, they're supposed to attend it for a certain amount of time. But like you said, it's an intervention, then integrate back. So the SEMH provision allowed children and young people to stay for longer. So we were, really meeting their needs. But actually our SEMH was slightly different, because we reintegrated, I can't remember the exact percentage now, but it was 90% of those young people we also reintegrated back into mainstream school, whereas a lot of SEMH provisions don't. That will be their main school. So that's what a PRU is. Also, I think just to mention, I think it's important, is that what often happens within pupil referral units is you have a mixture of children with varying needs, because often those young people have been excluded rather than at risk of exclusion. What happens is often young people attend the pupil referral unit and maybe they have undiagnosed needs. So sometimes you can have children and young people who then have to go for an assessment whilst they're at the pupil referral unit. And let's just say it comes out that they're autistic, for example. Then they don't reintegrate back into mainstream. Potentially some do, of course, but some may need an alternative provision that better fits their needs. So the way a pupil referral unit should be used and the way it is used is slightly often overlaps. But it has definitely got better over the years as people understand a little bit more about PRUs and how to use them and when to refer, etc.
Okay. I mean, I'm learning as much as anybody else. So I think is that unusual then for children? It feels like it may be to children that are on HCP or SEMH to go back to mainstream schools once they've got that support. I've never heard of that before. I mean, because the circles I travel in, don't get me wrong. But it's almost like, well, it's literally like you've helped them regulate their behaviours and emotions to a level where they're okay to go back into mainstream. Would they have extra support within the mainstream school, as in inclusion rooms, or would they go back into mainstream class? Or I guess it's a massive variation, but how would that work?
So first of all, yes, it's highly unusual for that to happen. The reason why I set it up that way, or we set it up that way, is because at the time it was such a mishmash, like I said, and we really needed to look at the referral process, get it a little bit more streamlined, so we didn't just have children and young people, adults who are at the end of their tether, understandably so, in the mainstream, and just constantly referring, because then we're oversubscribed. It puts pressure. You can't do the same work in the same way that you want. So the idea was to keep this kind of wheel moving. However, what I must say is that for children and young people who needed the SEMH provision for longer or long term, they would stay, but it was a very small percentage, because as we kind of untangled the web of how this provision was used, what happened was we recognized that what was happening was that so many of the mainstream schools just didn't know how to meet their needs. So in addition to supporting children and young people in the PRU and SEMH provision, I don't know how I did this at the time as head, because you've got so much on your plate. But what I also did is utilise my staff team without any extra pay or time. And we operated a very small, almost like an outreach service to the mainstream schools within the borough. So when a child integrated back into mainstream school, a member of staff from our school would go with them on certain days, and they weren't there just to kind of be that person next to that young person. They were there to model and to support to the staff within the mainstream how to meet the needs. I also developed a training package for mainstream schools as well. So that rolled out across the borough, and the training package was just around understanding behaviour as communication, understanding need, how needs present, and how to meet those needs within the school. So all of this was going on at the same time. So that's why we had so many of our SEMH kids integrating back, because the mainstream schools, their mindset and their environments were changing in order to cater for more of these children and young people successfully. So a lot was happening all at once. I don't know, honestly, when I think back, I don't know how we did all of that, but we did, and I'm glad that we did.
Wow, that's a lot of work. That sounds like a lot of work. May I just say that it sounds like you figured out the secret sauce of not getting the same child back again. You thought, let's not have a revolving door, and how can we better integrate the child? Okay, what are we doing as a team that we could do better? Oh, okay, let's support the school. And actually, I bet schools loved you because you've not asked for extra resources, you've not asked for extra money, you're offering free training. I bet they loved it when you walked back through the door with your team. But, you're sharing resources and skills and mindset and what's been working with that child. And you've not just dropped the child off and gone, here we go, we've done our bit, off you go to you. You're communicating, you're collaborating with the school. So I guess it's way better for the child, gives the child time to acclimatise, because one big thing I know a lot about children with SEN, and not just children with SEN, is detachment. So they more than likely, I'm presuming, would have struck a strong bond with your team, not just one person actually. So I guess that's a trigger, no doubt. If all of a sudden you've not got any of that team and they've just got the place where they felt they were triggered the most, all of a sudden back in that environment, the environment hasn't changed. I'm presuming, layman terms, the behaviours are just going to come right back again, and you're going to receive that child, no doubt, in X amount of time. So, yeah, I'm presuming that was the aim of it. Am I just breaking that down? I know it's a bit simple terms, but simple people out there like me listening. But is that about right? That was the aim of the game.
Yeah, no, that is perfect the way you've described it, because you're absolutely right. What would happen is children and young people would come into the PIU or SEMH provision and feel so comfortable. Now, don't get me wrong, they displayed high level behaviours initially when they came in. Let's put that in there. It wasn't easy. But the way that we'd set it up was also based on all the nurture group principles that I had put in place years before when I set up the nurture group provision, that as I was talking about earlier in terms of when I got the OBE. So all of those things were the foundation within the provision. So understanding attachment, trauma, but not just understanding at an intellectual level, understanding how to then support these young people when certain behaviours were presented. And you're absolutely right, they formed really secure attachments with the staff. So what we did was and everything developed over the years. Everything wasn't all done at once. So problems presented, and then we looked at. I used to say, don't look at it as a problem. Look at it as an opportunity to problem solve. So we had opportunities to problem solve, like you said, when it was like, oh my gosh, we used to call them boomerang children, where you integrated them back. They were so ready, but actually they missed the attachment with our staff. So then opportunity to problem solve. So we set up the provision in a way that as soon as the young person came in, the first thing we talked about was reintegration. So our provision was all about celebrating reintegration back into mainstream school. So the young person knew that you're here for a period of time, but that's your mainstream school. That's your school home. And so we did things like make sure that whilst the child was with us for the intervention, it was very rigorous. So the school came to visit us on numerous occasions to have review meetings. So we would be talking about what we're doing, giving the school time to prepare for when that young person returned. When the school came for the review meetings, we made sure that they always went to see the child. So they went to see them in the classroom. They had a one-to-one chat with them. So the child could see they hadn't forgotten them. You're still part of our school. So all of these things took place. If there was something going on at the school, like an event or a particular day, would make sure the child was invited. They'd go with one of our staff members there, but they were invited. So they always felt that they were part of the school. And then when it was time for reintegration, to reintegrate back, it was a massive celebration. So the whole school would get together when someone was due to reintegrate. Everyone would make them cards. It was a huge celebration. So we changed the mindset of of the provision and what it was all about.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Like the child never feels like they're not a part of that school anymore. This is not a place where you go. It's because I think for me as a child, they're thinking, oh no, I'm going to child prison. Like I'm a naughty child. Everyone says all the naughty children go there. That's where I go. They come. It's a beautiful environment where they're loved, they're nurtured. They get told all the time how important they are because they are important. How every staff cares about them, and then I guess it's easy for them to go, you know what, this is now. Oh, this is it. And I guess by saying this is more of a holiday, and you still keep contact with everyone at the other school. The integration's a lot easier. But yeah, it's a lot of coordination, no doubt, and it's a lot of work. But I guess the final outcome is a child smoothly, at best you can call it that. I guess it's not always smooth, but transitioning back to school. Okay. Another thing is really for me is kind of like, I think I just said it a little bit there, the stigma around PRUs. This is not uncommon when I speak to people that are passionate about working with children that go to PRUs and work in PRUs. And if I could unpack it a little bit, not to give it just to give a bland way of talking about it, like, oh, what's the stigma? But I think it's not just stigma, but kind of like misconceptions, which you've unpacked great about what goes on in a PRU and the point of a PRU and stuff like that. But for example, if I say a few different things really, just to, I guess, evolve the question a bit, like parents' perceptions of not wanting a child maybe go to a PRU because, they don't want the child labelled, or the misunderstanding of a child. People's misunderstanding that it's only children, and it does have children there that do have trauma and stuff like that, but it's not always children that have trauma or come from, I guess, a poor background. It's not just poor children that go, it's not just rich children that go, or, the concept it's a failed family home, that because that's what's caused it, or the teacher, is failed, therefore, etc. and so forth. It's not a child prison, it's not just for bad, naughty children, and I love the language, which I've seen you and your staff use. You don't ever use that type of words. You quickly correct a child if they use that type of language as well. It's a place for children to learn to become positive young adults. But yeah, so, and then I guess it's a fight against the industry to say this is what we're about. So yeah, what are your thoughts, I guess, on the stigma and on all these type of levels, I guess? And also, if you don't mind me just quickly adding this, sorry for a million questions. Through these type of stigmas, I guess, in my opinion, through that being a thing in some people's minds, you may not attract certain great staff to come and work with yourselves because they don't understand what it's about. And also, you've got parents not necessarily having a bit of hesitant to let the children go, or being open to the children spending some time in a PRU is the negative effects of stigmas. So this is why it's important to talk about stigmas and misconceptions and stuff like that. That's why I wanted to talk about it. Is that all right?
Yeah, no, of course. I'm really glad you've asked this question. I'm so pleased, because this is when I talk about all the things that we did in my pupil referral unit in social emotional mental health provision. I just really want to emphasize this wasn't done overnight. It wasn't easy. This took years to do, bit by bit. We didn't do everything at once, and the reason we did all of those things is because of everything that you've said in that question. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that there absolutely is a stigma attached to PRUs. I think I don't know how. I've got no evidence base. I was going to say I think it's getting better, but maybe it's not. But what I think is so important is that, and what we did in our PRU is that the first thing I did is think about the fact that this is an alternative provision, but it's still a school. It's still a school for children and young people. So when I was talking earlier, when I answered your earlier question about why I wanted to get into this, I was talking about behaviour and academic. I put the two together. Basically, this isn't just a place where children come and they learn to behave better. It's more than that. They come and that we support them to regulate themselves. And then once they're at the same time, they then are in a better position to learn. So all of our students who came to the school, they all took their SATs at the end. And these are children and young people who are 2, 3, 4 years behind their peers when they first came to the PRU. So if they was in year 6, they all took their SATs, and every single one of them maybe not to the exact same level as their national peers, but every single one of them achieved in the SATs. So I just want to put that out there because that's really important. And you asked about staff. So what I'd like to say about that is one of the things that we did is when I first went to the pupil referral unit as a class teacher first, and then I was a deputy, there were many teachers there who were instructors, and there's nothing wrong with instructors or unqualified teachers. However, one of the first things that I did when I became a senior leader with my head teacher at the time is we trained up all of the teachers to become qualified teachers, because we said these children and young people are deemed the most vulnerable children and young people in the borough. They should have the best staff. It doesn't mean unqualified teachers aren't the best staff. It just means that they should have qualified teachers teaching the curriculum the same way that they do in mainstream, because we're supposed to integrate them. They're going to need that top quality. So that's the first thing we did. So when we were recruiting, the interview process was very robust. So we were very clear on who we wanted to attract for these young children and young people. The other thing that I just want to say is that we taught the full national curriculum. Again, you don't have to within a pupil referral unit, but we chose to. But we did it in a way where, because obviously the class sizes are smaller, you had interventions running alongside the teaching the full national curriculum. Because as I said, a lot of these young people 2, 3, 4 years behind academically than their national peers. So we taught the full national curriculum by fully qualified teachers and learning support assistants. And we ran it alongside the national curriculum as it was being taught within the mainstream sector. So when they integrated back into the mainstream school, the gap wasn't so big academically. So again, all these things were what really helped with the children and young people. Language you've talked about, that was massive. That's all linked to the stigma. If we're talking, and it's okay, I've got a phrase which is no blame, no shame. We don't blame or shame ourselves or anyone else for certain things. Everyone's doing the best that they can from where they are. So no blame or shame. But, you know, we stopped, and I modelled it with my staff. We stopped using language like naughty, etc., and started to look beyond the behaviour. Why are they behaving in this way? What are they communicating? They're not a naughty child. Their behaviour is undesirable. So what are we going to do to support their needs? And then the final thing I want to say in answer to the question is that it was 2017, I had just become head teacher, and at the time there was a Victoria Derbyshire programme on the BBC, and with my executive head at the time, unbeknown to me, just before I became head, they were in talks about doing this filming one day where Victoria Derbyshire would come in with the BBC crew and they would film live in a PRU, because apparently it had never been done before in a primary PRU. And so when I became head, I was then told by the executive head, and by the way, this is what's going to happen. I was like, oh my gosh. So the reason I'm saying this to you is because the Victoria Derbyshire and the BBC crew came in and they were supposed to film for one day live in the PRU. And it was so interesting because they ended up staying for an entire week, which wasn't planned. And they filmed every day for an entire week because they couldn't believe what it was like inside our PRU. And it was like any other school, but obviously with less young people, and obviously children and young people with differing needs. But the expectations and the feel when you walk in the school was like any other school. It felt nurturing, high expectations, clear boundaries, etc. And children wanted to learn. They were keen to learn, and they were sat in their seats learning, and they couldn't believe it. And at one point, Victoria said to me in the interview, she was asking about cost and money, because it costs a lot for per head for a child within a PRU. And I'll never forget, because afterwards my dad said to me, I think she's trying to catch you out, but you answered that really well. And what I said to her, the answer was, I said, what we have to think about is if we invest this money now while the children are this age, this puts less pressure on society later on, because as we know, a lot of if you look at the prison data, for example, a lot of those people in prison can't read or write. I can't remember the percentage now, I do apologise. But actually, it puts less pressure on society later on when we're picking up unresolved trauma, or young offenders whose needs haven't been met, and then putting more pressure on society in that way. So I hope that answers your question. I know there's lots of different things in there, but we worked so hard to change that stigma around a pro.